Today we are going to dissect the just concluded Edo governorship election that happened on Saturday, 21st of September. And yes, the emergence of the APC's candidate, Okpobolo, as the winner of that election. And this is something we're going to talk about, the significance of this, the interest and the debate on all of this, because on social media, you must have come across, a lot of for and against when it comes to the electoral process. So in the studio here we have Dangieyefa Angalapu. He is a researcher analyst with the Center for Democracy and Development. And yes, hopefully we get to have someone to join us virtually soon to dissect this. But before that person join in the program, let's talk to Angalapu. Good morning. It's good to have you.
Good morning, Nigeria. Good morning. Good to be here.
It's always good to have you. So last Monday, we had, a conversation about expectations and fear and predictions. I want to hear your first reaction, on the aftermath of this election.
So I will say that the playoff that happened on Saturday was much like we predicted in our last conversation. So we said some very obvious things. That first, that it's going to be a prosy election, an election that brought to play the outgoing governor and of course the former governor, Adams Oshiomhole, where they were more prominent than even the players, the candidates in the election. We noted that, very, very well. We also talked about the fact that the economy will come into play. How we had a fuel scarcity, we had all of the dampening macroeconomics dynamics that we have in the country, and how that would result to vote buying. We saw that also. We also discussed the place that violence would play. When we had rhetorics like the election will be a do-or-die affair. I think that's one thing that we need to commend the security agencies for. We did not see the widespread violence that we had envisaged, which is actually a good thing. So I think that somewhat is still some kind of missed reaction. We've not gotten to that level that we need to get to. But I think that in terms of election management in Nigeria, we will say there are positives and there are also things that we need to improve upon.
Indeed. All right, we have, like I said earlier, we have our Zoom guest from Benin. It's Paul James. He is the program election manager of YIAGA Africa, but he would join us shortly. Let's come back to the studio to Angalapu on all of these matters. Now, we had fears, of INEC, not maybe doing right by the people, just a bit fear of perhaps electoral materials going at the wrong time or not even reaching the destination and the polling units. And our correspondent gave us an update on all of that happening, where some people were complaining that they did not get election materials early. But then, based on the Center for Democracy, I'm sure you're part of the people that were checking and, of course, keeping tab on all of this that was happening. Was there any place that did not get the election material? Was there any doubt, and fears or skepticism when it comes to the INEC's performance?
Yes, some of the perennial challenges that we've seen with INEC came to play, and one is election logistics management. So there were some places like Emotan College where as late as 10 o'clock election had not taken place because election materials had not arrived, and that was due to several issues. One is a climatic condition, and that's one thing that I think that we need to begin to discuss more. There was a heavy rainfall in Edo that day on Saturday, and what had happened was that delayed the movement of election material. That is one, and then the second part of it is the relationship between INEC and the National Union of Road Transport Workers. There were all of these controversies of vehicles not being available, or available drivers not being available. There was no fuel and all of those stuff. All of those contributed to it. The third factor is the non-availability of security agencies. So sometimes the INEC officials were ready to go, but security agencies were not there. So the sensitive thing to do at that time is to wait for security agencies to escort the sensitive materials down to the polling unit. So all of those added to the delay. There were also sometimes that security agencies were available, but the INEC officials were not ready. So we need to begin to rethink how we manage our election logistics. But by and large, over 45% of the polling units in Edo did not start early. Did not start early, and we are talking about low voter turnout. I believe we are going to get there, but just to say that if there was a high voter turnout and then you're beginning elections by 11 o'clock, 11:30 in some places, and and people really turn out to vote, really, I don't think that we would have been able to manage the elections when it gets to to the ninth time. It is better that we begin our elections early enough and then end early enough, really. So sometimes this low voter turnout plays to our favor, really. It's not a very good thing, but it plays to our favor, because if everybody turns out to vote, really, and then you don't start elections early, it will mean that you begin elections by 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m. in the night. You're still conducting elections, and at the dark of the night is when many evil things really happen.
Yes, indeed. But then talking about the voters turnout, what are the factors that you think brought about this? Because we saw how before the election everybody was on their toes campaigning, and people were pointing out, from our callers, talking about how even with every governor, past governors of Edo State, Edo has not grown. There is no infrastructural development yet. So why do you think they did not come out to exercise their right for a better future?
So I think it's quite simple. First off, if you hear the rhetorics before the election, the pre-election violence, the fact that people said the election will be a do-or-die affair, the fact that a peace accord was not signed. Man's fundamental need is survival, peace and security. So you would think of to survive. I mean, if you survive not voting in this election, you have several elections to vote, but if you die voting in this election, you don't have any more election to vote. So I really think that people maybe prioritize their security. They wanted to watch to see what's going to happen. That's one. And secondly, it might also have been that citizens are losing attachment to the candidates and parties.
Yeah.
So, for example, it could be that by some objective or unobjective, thinking, they would have thought that, well, whether it's the APC, whether it's the PDP, whether it's the Labour Party, what is even there for us? Really. So those things determine whether people are coming out to vote, because sometimes they will say, well, I think that rather than go out to vote, really, and not see any change within the next 8 years, within the next 4 years, probably I will need to open up my small kiosk and sell, or even go to the farm. So those things come to play. The third is also the quality of the campaign. We saw a situation where candidates of major political parties did not, avail themselves for debates. We had conversation of a particular party saying our party is more of a grassroots, a grassroots candidate. So he's actually in the grassroots. He doesn't want to appear in television and all of that. So all of those stuff, it means that the candidates themselves did not, the quality of the campaigns, the candidate did not engage the citizens as much. So it would mean there was no connection. There was no connection. There was rather more connection to the godfathers than it were to the candidates. So those of all of those issues must have played out in making sure that people do not turn out to vote. And perhaps people are still looking at the controversies from even the 2023 elections. Yeah. Let's not forget that these things have a way of playing out. Yeah, so it is like that's a state where the Labour Party won.
Yes.
It's a state where the Labour Party won, and all of the eyes on the judiciary and optimism that Labour Party would win through the court and all of that, they would champion it basically because they invested in the process. And seeing out all of those things go, people are beginning to say maybe our votes would not count. So I think that it's an early call for us to begin to rejig the confidence of Nigerians in the electoral process as we go to 2027 elections.
Indeed. Now, talking about previous, current, and then even moving forward, do you think there was a correlation of this election to the 2023 presidential election, considering we saw how Labour Party did, amazingly 2023, but then now it went super back? Is there any correlation to that?
Yes, there are strong correlations. one thing we have to understand really in Nigeria is that at this point in our history, it is now more about individuals than parties. And that is a strong correlation that I think we must note. So if you see the 2023 general elections, Labour Party did very, very well because of the obedient factor, right? The Labour Party had a Peter Obi that was loved by the youths and all of that. Although it wasn't an harmonious whole where all of the youths supported Peter Obi and all of that. But considerably, you see a very youthful population supporting him. Now, if you in those same elections, those same federal elections, if you look at how the results in Edo, you will see that Labour Party did not perform so well in the House of Representative election. They didn't perform so well in the House of the senatorial elections, and that's to see that they actually know the candidates. So at this point in time, they do not care whether it's a PDP, a Labour Party, or the APC. It is more on the individuals. Akpata has been someone, he's a technocrat, well established and all of that. But I also told you that election in this context is local, and there are local sentiments to it. And I said Obaseki, it's from Edo South, where Akpata comes from, and Obaseki had just ruled the state for 8 years, right? And the Edo South has gotten it for like 16 years now. And then the Central just got it for about 18 months thereabout. I mean, their tenure was truncated in 2008. So there are those sentiments. So the question is, what are you coming to do? Really, I'm not saying that is the ideal, because we need to look beyond zoning identities and all of that. Indeed. But in the current state of Nigeria, you cannot separate identity, and zoning from the reality of politics in Nigeria. So that was what played against the Labour Party. So at the local level, they know themselves and they are looking at the individuals. Now, if you look at even in national elections, what played to the favor of a Peter Obi was the fact that the Southeast has not gotten it. So whether I look at the zoning, whether I look at the charisma of the candidates in terms of appealing to the youths, he had it. So you must have the zoning factor. You must also have the appeal to the populace for you to move that kind of way. Okay,
interesting. But before we continue with this, of course, let's take a look at two videos which would come back to dissect. One of the governor, that's the current governor, Godwin Obaseki, addressing the people of Edo to calm down, even though he feels that democracy, did not prevail. And then another is of the former governor, Adam Soshomale, making some snide remarks, about how it was about time that, Obaseki let go of this power that he has. So let's take a look.
Which came to a
All right, we seem to have technical problems. We'll definitely come back to that. But then I don't know if you've come across these videos. I wanted Nigerians to understand that way we can dissect into it, but we can explain it through. Obaseki talked about, how democracy, was trampled upon. He pointed out that Edo people are not happy, hence the reason they came out to protest. We saw a protest happening on Sunday and all of that. And then we saw Adam Oshomole talking about celebrating with the Senate president there and even the winner of the election, which is Okpobolo, talking about how, Obaseki reign was too evil. He used the word like that and quoting some biblical words and all of that. Let's hear your take on these two people's perspective and how it affects the people of Edo.
This is the unfortunate part of the Nigerian politics, where a winner takes it all and a loser possibly loses everything. That is not how democracy should be. In every camp in a democracy, you have some fine gentlemen and women, that you can bring on board. So at this point in time, what should be beneficial to the Edo people is not a quarrel, but how to build a consensus-based government, a government that brings, both opposition party and or a party that has won into projecting the Edo project. So I think it's quite worrisome. More worrisome is the fact that, the election, and he had made some legitimate claims that can't be swept aside. So, for example, we also noticed in some places that some of the results that were uploaded on IREV were actually very blurry. And in some places also, even the results uploaded on IREV, the number of accredited voters we're actually lower than what the APC scored. So these are critical claims, right? But the worry is that this might now lead to election litigation.
As expected.
As expected, really. But that's a serious implication for the state. Whether it is personal funds that are expended on that, or whether it is state funds that are expended on that, it will mean that critical funds in a time where the economy is at a very low, that can be used for the roads, for the hospitals in Edo State, will be channeled to the judiciary. So these are some critical situations. So it is not about losing or winning. It's about the Edo people. And if you think about the Edo people, you should know that both the PDP, both the Labour Party had made good promises to the Edo people. What can you pick from the Labour Party? What can you pick from the PDP? And then run a consensus-based government that will benefit the Edo people. Because what I suspect will happen with all of this statement will be some kind of witch hunting and fighting. That is not good for the Edo people.
Yeah.
It is not good for the APC, it is not good for the PDP, it is not good for the Labour Party. So what is needed now is to project, the Edo people. They've said that for the last 8 years, they've not had a feel of governance. So what is supposed to be happening now is to see that we want to change that trajectory, not some kind of witch hunting and some distractions that are not necessary for governance.
Indeed, you're talking about distraction on that part. But then yes, we have our guest that was supposed to join us Zoom, but we can talk to him via phone call from Benin. Paul James, who is the program election manager of YIAGA Africa. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much for joining us. And now let's hear your take on the election so far. I have to just put it out there. YIAGA Africa is one of the group that have paid attention to this election. So would you consider this election free and fair? And was there any, significant irregularities or challenges that you might have come across?
To conclude that an election is free, fair, you want to see that it satisfies certain elements of inclusivity, elements of transparency, and elements of accountability. Going into the election, we identified 3 critical things that we thought could shape the election. One was the election integrity test. That is the test on the ability of the election management body to give the people of Edo the election that they want or the election that they deserve. And then the resilience test on the part of the citizens to engage the process no matter the odds. And then also the election impartiality test, that is on the security agencies to ensure a level playing field for everyone. Going into that election and the outcome, of course, it was bedeviled by the what has now become, if you like, the usual features of our elections, the delays, the logistic challenges that characterize delaying the commencement of polls, the concerns around also electoral infractions like vote buying and all of that we saw on that day. And again, the concerns also around the resource collation process. On the part of citizens, what was concerning was that despite the challenges of the election, some of them made attempts to participate in the process. Voter turnout in the election is 22%, a sharp drop from the 27% that we saw in the 2020 election. So, if you also look at the number of PVCs that have been collected, also the number of people on the register, over 85% of PVCs have been collected according to INEC data. and then increase of more than 19% in the number of registered voters from the 2.2 million we had in 2020 to about 2.6 million in this election. But despite all of this, we see that the number for the percentages for turnout has not improved significantly. But other than that, also on the part of the Election Commission, I thought it significantly also was able to recover from the challenges we saw in the morning. But the delayed commencement of polls is something that I think we should have treated by now. What has happened in the morning of the election is some officials that couldn't even know the location of their polling units, or were waiting for vehicles. Vehicles were working like town service to drop these people off, to come back and pick this group up and all of that. That constituted delay. But again, we commend them for extending the time of voting, but not also minding not also giving excuse to what had happened that necessitated the delays, what I thought should be remedied before we go into the Ondo election. The results collation process became a big challenge, and if you see, my friend from CDD is there with you. Yesterday morning, there was a joint statement that was issued by the different groups that are involved in the election, that are observing the election here, CDD, YIAGA, Africa, Electa, Attack Foundation, and the likes, to strongly raise our, concerns about what had happened during the results collation processes, especially at the local government level. We saw attempts to undermine the process in Oredo, in Ibaba Oha, in Ego, and in Esako West local government. In Esako West, for instance, there was sporadic gunshots, and somebody sustained serious gun injuries. In Eboba and Oredo collation centers, what we saw was observers and officials were tear gassed. These were all attempts to undermine the process, and the outcome that we're now seeing from those locations are questionable, where we thought some results are either inflated or some results are also reduced to favor certain interests or certain candidates. This should not be happening in our electoral democracy. It is hugely concerning. And another point I'd also want to raise is the point around the participation of politically exposed persons in the elections. And if there is one big lesson for me to take out of this election, is the fact that we need to begin to think about, maybe go back to having elections in one day, so that if everybody is now focused on how to win election in their own state, it will reduce the amount of pressure we see in the institutions and other stakeholders that are involved in the election. Police, for instance, have to provide security for politically exposed persons that came to support their parties, provide security for INEC. It was just too much to manage in a single day. Almost every state governor was in Edo last weekend just to promote their own political parties' interest in the election. I don't think that should be, as much as I know it's a democracy, it is not something that we should be encouraging, especially if we think about the taxpayers' money that was expended to do this. We cannot be planning for election for 2-3 months, and then politicians will make a mockery of the process just in the weekend of the election. A lot of investment has gone in by civil society and even the stakeholders to plan for the election. But what do you get? Concerns still about vote buying. It was about the highest bidder in the election, the person that is willing to pay the highest money or to collect the highest money. That shouldn't be happening in our election, and it's something that I think we need an urgent fix.
I honestly appreciate you. You actually covered a lot of things, but I think we can let you go with this much that you say. Thank you so much, Paul James, for joining us to dissect this election. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, that was Paul James. He's the program election manager of YIAGA Africa. Now, coming back, of course, to the studio where we have Dangieyefa Angalapu, a research analyst with the Center for Democracy and Development, to hear his take on this. Now, you've heard the fear from the other camp of YIAGA, from another civil society group. What are your take on his own observations, which I know most of them come with what the Center for Democracy have perhaps observed?
So these are objective observations, and of course Paul James had mentioned the joint statement that we issued. So one thing that came out very clear, like he had said, was the worry about the coalition process. So if you read our preliminary statement that we gave in the afternoon, were very beyond late opening of polls, beyond the fears, beyond the rains and all of those disruptions that happened in the morning. We were very optimistic about the process. And we even commended the security agencies for the absence of violence that we've seen, the low level of violence rather that we've seen. But when it got to the collation, we had suspected that would be a challenge. What we've seen in Nigerian election is that if the polling units are not targeted, the next place where people tend to target is the collation center. And that's where a lot of things happen. And I think we should begin to think of how we can remanage the collation process and how that can be to be very transparent. You can see it's a situation where INEC staffers themselves were tear gassed. I think that's absolutely unacceptable. We've seen a situation where, situations where even civil society organizations were not allowed into the collation center. That led us to believe that something very funny must have gone wrong, and it's so the PDP came out to give a press briefing to show their dissatisfaction with the collation process. And those are some of the issues that leads us to post-election violence and all of the distractions that come with that. So I think that we need to begin to watch that. It's something that is very important. He mentioned something that is very, very important about politically exposed person. Beyond the governors and all of that, a critical issue in this election was the accusation that the regional electoral commissioner was related to the FCT minister. Those are the kind of things. Those optics are not right. Are not right for even the transparency of the process. Indeed. So that would really make people to dig deep into some of the issues just cast doubts on the process. So I think that we need to interrogate those kind of issues more. And the issue of vote buying, we saw that in places between 5,000 to 10,000 were used to buy votes. And so the challenge now is, if a politician has spent that amount of money, across 3 senatorial districts in 18 local government area, and then it comes to he wins the election, would you really think that he will not recuperate that money? Okay. So that would mean that we've sacrificed our development at the altar of 5 to 10,000 naira. Penny. Yeah. So I think it's a very, very serious concern. It means that we've not gotten there yet, and we must strive to see that our democracy works in Nigeria.
That is the point. But then give us in just a minute, lessons that we've learned from this we should carry on for next election. I mean, there was something he pointed on off cycle should be cancelled because it's putting all limelight on a particular state, and a lot can happen that we cannot really control. But then apart from that, what lessons do you think that we should learn from this election?
One, the very first lesson we should learn is to begin to think of how we can manage our logistics process. That's one. The second lesson that we should learn is how to manage the security. That is very, very important. The third lesson that we should learn also is to look at one critical issue that we don't tend to consider, and it's the weather. INEC provisions say you cannot take umbrellas to the polling unit because umbrellas can serve as weapons. Yes, it is true. But we have issues of climate change, and we can't even predict the weather anymore and all of that. That could lead to low voter turnout. How do we mitigate this? Are we going to go to a situation where we are going to extend the voting time, or are we going to go to electronic voting or whatever? But we need to think of a way out of this situation. Then, for me, lastly, it is how we can deal with the issue of vote buying. Because as much as we have seen, vote buying is beginning to be one of the biggest challenges of election management in the country.
Well, in the Electoral Act, I mean, it is a huge crime. So people giving this vote, this money to voters should be arrested. So why are they not being held accountable? So
we had a situation, and of course you mentioned it, about EFCC arresting about 3 persons. But 3 persons out of how many?
Out of thousands.
Really? So that's the challenge. So the Electoral Offences Commission has to come on board. We need to see that people are punished for crimes such as vote buying, and beyond that also, someone is giving that money. So you cannot be punishing someone collecting 10,000, 5,000 while you're leaving the source of the money.
Yeah.
Really. So we need to ensure that electoral finance management comes on board. How do we manage the monies that we say should be used on elections, even on campaigns and all of that? We need to see how we can manage and scrutinize that process. Then, very importantly, we need to begin to see how our critical persons that manage our electoral processes are elected or appointed.
Okay.
So all of the recs and politically exposed persons that we see on board and all of that, no, the appointment processes should be changed. So we don't need to see card-carrying members of the APC or the PDP or the Labour Party or any other political party being, managers of the electoral process.
That's a great point there. Thank you so much, Dangieyefa, Angalapu. Always a pleasure talking to you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Now, the person we just finished talking to is a research analyst with the Center for Democracy and Development. Thank you so much for staying with us through this segment. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we will look at the front pages of the national dailies. Stay with us.